The name echoed through the most influential corridors of Lagos. Wherever he went, eyes followed, some with admiration, others with envy disguised as respect. Chuka Obi was not just a successful businessman, he was the standard, the face of multi-million-dollar campaigns, the guest of honor at diplomatic dinners, the name that opened doors without needing to knock. The only child of an oil magnate and a former education minister, he grew up amidst mirrored walls and gilded halls. He studied in London, graduated with honors in economics, and returned to Nigeria determined to make his own mark. And he did. Before turning 30, he took the helm of the Obi Group, transforming the family holding into a continental empire. Energy, transportation, technology, real estate. The Obi name was everywhere that mattered. On the outside, the picture was one of perfection. Tall, athletic, with impeccable posture and a presence that silenced rooms. Dark skin with a uniform glow, short hair always neatly trimmed, a beard meticulously groomed. His light brown eyes seemed to carry something beyond ambition, calculation, memory, intuition. He dressed with understated luxury, tailored suits, heirloom cufflinks, shoes that never looked worn. He didn't need to say he was wealthy. He was the kind of man who could dominate a room just by entering in silence. Despite being surrounded by stunning women at public events, Chuka was rarely seen with the same person twice. He had a reputation for being demanding, reserved, and extremely selective. His heart, it was said, was guarded, perhaps out of wisdom, perhaps because of something no one knew. The fact was, his image was always tied to control. He was the kind of man who never missed a schedule, never stumbled in interviews, never apologized in public. Everything was under command, or so it seemed. His schedule was split between meetings in Lagos, international trips, and strategic retreats with high-level executives. When not in formal attire, he piloted luxury speedboats, rode horses on the outskirts of Abuja, or played squash with ministers. He was the kind of man who knew exactly which wine to order, which button to press, which word to use to outmaneuver an opponent without raising his voice. There was method in every gesture, and that made him almost untouchable. In interviews, the press treated him as a symbol of the new African pride, a Western mind shaped by ancestral values, a sophisticated leader who never abandoned his roots. And indeed, Chuka never pretended to be a foreigner. Despite his impeccable English and fluency in French, he spoke Yoruba perfectly and kept family traditions rigorously alive. To the elite, he was the ideal heir. To the masses, the unattainable. But not everything was about financial victories. His public image hid the loneliness of someone who no longer knew whom to trust. Decisions came with weight, meetings with masks, smiles with hidden agendas. Having everything often meant being alone even when surrounded by everyone. Still, Chuka showed no weakness. If he felt something, he kept it to himself. Strength was his armor, perfection his defense. Most saw only the shine, few knew the cost, and none imagined what lay ahead. If even the most powerful man can fall, it's what truly keeps someone standing. The story is just beginning. Subscribe and activate the bell to not miss the twist that changed everything. His schedule was packed, as always. The trip to Cape Town was just another in the exhausting routine of a man who juggled more commitments than hours in a day. Meetings with investors, signing solar energy contracts, dinners with local politicians. Everything timed, rehearsed, flawless. The five-star hotel, the private driver, the discreet security, nothing seemed out of control that clear sky morning. Leaving the event, the limousine glided through light traffic. Ambient music filled the car's interior, and the phone buzzed with confirmations of deals closed. A discreet smile, a nod, another triumph on the way to the next goal, but in seconds everything unraveled. A screech of brakes, muffled screams, twisting metal. An SUV speeding through the intersection slammed into the vehicle with brutal force. The impact threw bodies and thoughts out of logic. Shattered glass, smoke, sirens. A dull pain pierced his abdomen, his chest, and emptiness. His legs wouldn't respond. It wasn't just physical pain, it was the terrifying silence of not feeling. His open eyes searched for a sign that this was reversible, but even before medical confirmation, something deep inside already knew. Nothing would ever be the same. Days in the hospital were a blur. Doctors came and went with technical terms that felt like disguised blows. Irreversible vertebral fracture, permanent spinal cord injury, loss of motor function. The words fell like thorns. Each one stripped away a piece of the identity built on performance, aesthetics, dominance. The body, once synonymous with strength and presence, was now unfamiliar, limited, vulnerable. Back in Nigeria, the master bedroom of the mansion was hastily adapted, carpets removed, ramps installed, bars fixed beside the bed. But no architecture could support the invisible fall happening inside. The man who commanded entire rooms now needed help to reach a toothbrush, and even surrounded by professionals, security and staff, nothing hurt as much as the disguised looks of pity. The pain wasn't just physical. It came with the constant feeling of being watched with forced compassion, smiles too careful, voices too soft, as if everyone around had already accepted a mourning before death itself. The phone that once rang non-stop now stayed silent for hours. Unanswered messages, invitations that stopped coming. The world seemed to keep spinning, without him at its center. By the bedside, Kelechi kept her composure. Made-up face, elegant clothes, expensive perfume. She touched his hand lightly, posted about being by the side of the man of her life, and posed beside the wheelchair in perfectly framed photos. But there was an emptiness in her gaze, something that couldn't be photographed or disguised. Her touch lacked warmth, her voice lacked affection. Her presence was a performance, and like all performances, it had an expiration date. Behind the scenes, the business began to waver. His absence from strategic meetings sparked murmurs. Once loyal partners started realigning discreetly. Reports stopped being sent, decisions made without consultation. The empire built with such rigor now echoed whispers of succession. But none of that hurt as much as the silence settling within his own home. Sleepless nights became routine. The bedroom ceiling became a companion. The wheelchair a constant reminder of all that could no longer be done. Dancing, running, riding horses, climbing stairs, making love naturally. The absence of his legs was too symbolic for a man guided by absolute control. It was as if the world had decided to break someone running too fast, and in that breaking it dragged far more than his body. Little by little, his mind began flirting with dangerous questions. It wasn't the pain that hurt most. It was the doubt. Who am I now? The man who inspired a generation could no longer inspire himself, and what was once called a perfect life now felt like a distant memory of a time that would never return. When life takes everything, the absence of those who promise to stay hurts even more. If you believe he can still find true love, leave a heart in the comments. Sometimes a heart is enough to say, I still believe someone can stay for who we are. Chuka had a fiancé, and the news of the wedding was already anticipated and discussed across high society. Gossip columnists scrambled for any hint of a date or venue. Invitations hadn't been sent, but the elite's inner circles already treated the couple as if the altar were days away. She was a fixture at gala events, appearing beside him at official dinners, and the name Kelechi already circulated among Lagos's most exclusive groups as the future Mrs. Obi. None of this was by chance. Kelechi was a strikingly beautiful black woman with deep brown skin, long straightened hair down to her waist, always impeccably made up and dressed in flawless outfits. Ambitious and strategic, she knew where to be, how to act, and whom to approach. Her presence was constant at luxury brand launches, charity cocktails, and corporate gatherings. She didn't need to say she was someone. You knew it the moment she walked in. It was in these settings that she caught Chuka's eye. The most powerful man in the country noticed this woman with firm posture, sharp intellect, and commanding presence. It started subtly, exchanged glances, brief comments about social projects, a discreet smile. But one more encounter led to a dinner invitation. From there, their public appearances intensified, and the image of the perfect couple took shape before the eyes of the press and society. Kelechi knew exactly the role she needed to play. She never demanded more than was offered, never aired disputes, never caused discomfort in public. She understood that being by Chuka's side was more than a relationship. It was a position, a shared throne of sorts, and she knew how to act like a queen, even if the throne was just a facade. If there was love, even she didn't know, but there was power, and that was enough. After the accident, she stayed. She remained by his side as everyone expected, the strong, loyal, present woman. She posted messages of support, attended physiotherapy sessions with encouraging words, and smiled in interviews as if they were facing everything together. But something in her eyes had changed. The sparkle that once sought the camera lens now avoided his gaze. Her presence remained steadfast, but the feeling, that had never truly existed. And no matter how much she was still there, something inside her had left long ago. Do you believe someone can plan an entire relationship purely out of self-interest? Answer in the comments, yes or no. Let's see how many have crossed paths with someone who was only there for convenience. Kelechi stayed by Chuka's side. She endured the days of bad moods, the bursts of frustration, the heavy, leaden silences. She faced the weight of his quiet, the vacant stare of a man who no longer recognized himself. The wheelchair brought limits, physical and emotional, and living beside someone who was once dominance and now pain required patience. And she had it, not out of love, but calculation. And that calculation demanded presence. To society, she was the perfect fiancée. She didn't abandon him. She stood firm. She stepped back from parties, reorganized her schedule, reduced her exposure. Behind the scenes, though, she grew restless. The grand wedding she dreamed of was no longer feasible. The family preferred to avoid the press, the moment too delicate for ostentation, and so after much emotional insistence and subtle pressure, the marriage was formalized. A small ceremony, intimate, serious. It wasn't what she wanted, but marrying was what mattered, because marrying secured the future, her own and Ikenna's. On the surface, Ikenna was the ideal employee, punctual, competent, loyal, one of the few trusted members of the group's board. But away from the cameras, Ikenna was far more than a dedicated executive. He was an old lover, a silent accomplice, a partner in ambition. Their relationship predated the accident, and now with the ring on her finger and the surname secured, they both knew the plan needed to go further. At first, the idea was simple. Wait a few years, file for divorce citing emotional strain, and walk away with half the fortune. It would take time, but it would work. But ambition grew like weeds, insatiable. The calculations shifted, the conversations grew bolder, and it was on a stifling afternoon in Ikenna's car that the phrase was spoken aloud for the first time. What if he wasn't here anymore? The silence that followed wasn't shock, it was acceptance. Neither looked at the other with guilt, only logic. The will was signed. The assets were already in the couple's name. All it would take was an accident, something tragic, irreversible, and everything would be resolved. Quick, without scandals, without legal disputes, just grief that no one would question. Because she was the perfect widow, they planned the trip as if it were an act of care. Let's get out of Lagos, she said. You need to breathe a little. The sea will do you good. Chuka hesitated, but he gave in. The days were too heavy, the loneliness unbearable, and despite something in his instinct screaming, the hope of feeling peace again convinced him. The team was reduced to a minimum. The destination, an isolated island with restricted access and surrounded by silence. Everything seemed calm. The sun high, the breeze cutting through the skin, the yacht gliding over the waters. Kelechi, with her hair tied back and a light smile, chatted casually. Ikenna served wine, adjusted the sails, talked about how good it was to see him out of the house. Everything meticulously natural, almost too perfect. And it was precisely in the turn of the wind, when attention shifted to the horizon, that the plan would come to fruition. A sudden push, a muffled scream, a body falling, and the sea swallowing everything. They would return in silence. They would say it was too quick, a slip, a lapse. They'd hold a press conference with tears in their eyes. They'd use words like tragedy and fate. And soon after, the inheritance would be under their control. It was that simple, cold, calculated, and until that moment, perfect. What they didn't know was that the sea had other plans. When betrayal comes from the one smiling by your side, the danger doesn't shout, it whispers. If this part moved you, write in the comments, Chuka alert, because no one imagines that the greatest enemy might be the one serving wine by your side. The sun was at its peak, scorching the yacht's surface like an open furnace. The waters off the coast of Elashe seemed too calm, as if hiding what was about to happen. The trip had been planned to seem light, spontaneous, a gesture of love from the wife. But everything that afternoon was meticulously rehearsed. Every smile, every chosen bottle of wine, even the seating arrangement. Nothing was by chance. Chuka, seated near the edge with his dress shirt open and his face turned to the sea, tried to take in the scenery. He wasn't at peace, but it was the closest he'd felt in months. The breeze was gentle, the boat's sway almost lulling. For a moment he even forgot the pain in his back and the emptiness in his chest, but he didn't see the cold gaze forming behind him, a gaze that held no resentment, only raw ambition. Kelechi approached, from behind, a glass in hand, barefoot on the deck. She wore a white linen dress and had her hair elegantly tied up. She was beautiful, as always, but what stirred within her wasn't beauty, it was calculation. When she rested her hand on Chuka's shoulder, he turned his face and gave a faint smile. "Thank you for this, really." She didn't respond with words, just smiled. Behind her, Ikenna appeared with an excuse, a towel to dry sweat, a bottle to refill, the devoted employee, the invisible man. He passed by them, moved to the back of the yacht, and waited for the exact moment when Kelechi, with a gentle touch, leaned her husband's body slightly forward, distracting him with a casual remark. The push came next. Quick, calculated, cold, strong hands on his back, a sharp shove. The sound of his body hitting the side of the boat echoed in the air for an endless second, followed by a dull thud against the water. No scream, just silence. A dense silence that sealed the scene like a secret. They exchanged a glance. No shock, no guilt, just the need to stay calm. "He fell," Kelechi murmured, as if already rehearsing the official version. "No one saw," Ikenna replied. "We'll say he slipped." They hurried to erase the traces. They threw the broken glass that fell during the impact into the sea, adjusted the chairs' positions, turned on the radio to give the scene a carefree air. In less than 3 minutes, the yacht looked like a leisure setting again. The plan was simple: wait. Half an hour, call the authorities, and say that Chuka, depressed and confused, had fallen into the sea. None of the crew present knew the truth. They'd been instructed to keep their distance that afternoon. Rest, they were told. Privacy, the perfect setting for a tragedy without witnesses. But the sea doesn't cooperate with liars. As the minutes ticked by and the current carried the lifeless body away from the boat, something happened. What should have been the end became a beginning. On the coast of Bielsa, life went on, unaware that miles away a fate had been violently torn from its path. Adana's boat glided over the waters, silent, carrying a few shrimp traps and a wicker basket with fresh fish. The day felt strange, the wind heavier, the sky with metallic hues and an unease she couldn't name, until she heard the sound, low, deep, different, a muffled noise from afar. She rowed in the opposite direction, squinting, shielding her face with her hand, and she saw it. A dark shape floating near the rocks. She thought it was driftwood, maybe a lost net, but instinct urged her closer. As her boat approached, her blood ran cold. It was a man, unconscious, partially submerged, head tilted to the side, legs still. He wasn't a fisherman, nor did he look like a local. His soaked shirt revealed tailoring details no one in the village wore. An important man, but in that moment, just a body adrift. Adana didn't hesitate. She tied a rope around her waist, jumped into the sea, and swam to him. With difficulty, she supported the weight of his limp body, pulled him to the boat, and with great effort, laid him across the nets. His chest still rose and fell, though weakly. His face was scratched, the right side of his body covered in bruises, and on his back, a deep purple mark as if he'd been pushed against something hard. She rowed back to the village, her arms burning. The sea felt heavier, as if testing her faith, but she didn't stop. When she arrived, she shouted, "For help!" Her limping father, her frantic mother came to meet her. They laid the man on a straw mat in the hut. The smell of salt, blood, and hope filled the air. Hours later, when he awoke, he didn't know where he was. He tried to move, but his body wouldn't obey. His gaze wandered like someone who'd returned from a place they shouldn't have been. Then her voice cut through the air, calm and firm. "You're alive. That's what matters now." In the days that followed, she cared for the stranger, as if he were her own. Damp cloths, herbs for pain, carefully made fish broth. He wouldn't say his name. He called himself Uzo, an instinctive disguise, and she didn't press. She knew pain sometimes needs silence, and in his eyes, there was much pain, but also something new, gratitude. Little by little, the nameless man began to return. His wounds healed. His sleep grew less restless. He still couldn't move his legs, but life started reappearing in his eyes. And every time Adana entered the hut with a tray or a clean cloth, He looked at her as if trying to understand why, of all places, he'd been saved there. Rumors started in the village. Who was this man? Why was the unmarried girl hiding a stranger in her home? But Adana ignored them. There was something about that encounter that defied logic, and within her, a quiet certainty grew. This was no coincidence. Meanwhile, in Lagos's high society, the papers broadcasted the tragedy. A businessman disappears at sea. Press. Conferences were held. Kelechi wept before the cameras. Ikenna stood in the background with a discreet gaze and mournful expression. But neither knew that the sea had returned what they tried to hide. And it all began there, with a simple act, a rescue, a forgotten name, and a woman who rode against the current, unaware she was carrying the truth an entire country thought lost. Have you ever felt like something pushed you to the end, but fate pulled you back? Write in the comments, I survived. Let's see who else has survived something no one expected. In the capital, Kelechi and Ikenna's return was carefully orchestrated. Before the sun even set that day, an official statement was sent to the press. During a private outing, businessman Chuka Obi slipped on the yacht's deck and fell into the sea. The current prevented immediate rescue. Searches continue. The absence of witnesses played in their favor. The crew had been dismissed for the couple's intimate reasons. There were no cameras at the spot where the accident was declared, and to top it off, Chuka had been, according to prior reports, emotionally unstable since the accident that left him paraplegic. The papers showcased Kelechi's public grief with carefully selected photos. Red eyes, hair tied in a bun, black mourning attire. Beside her, Ikenna stayed in the background, the loyal aide supporting the devastated widow. It wasn't hard to win over public opinion. Comments like, he couldn't handle his new life or a foretold tragedy flooded news portals. The commotion quickly turned into legal speculation. Without a body, but with aligned reports and testimonies, Kelechi began the legal process to be declared a presumed widow. It was only a matter of time. Within the company, the void left by Chuka was felt, but only by those who truly knew him. Ikenna stepped into the role of interim CEO without hesitation. With the authority of someone who was there during the tragedy, he began leading meetings, changing protocols, restricting access. His once discreet presence became dominant. The office that belonged to the former boss was cleared out, almost as if it had never existed. But not everyone bowed to the new order. Obiora, Chuka's personal secretary for over a decade, couldn't digest the event so easily. He knew his boss's habits, his quirks, his fears, his silences. And one thing didn't add up: the decision to go to sea. Chuka had avoided water since the accident. He dreaded getting wet, even during adapted physiotherapy baths. The sea wasn't a place where he felt free. It was synonymous with vulnerability, and Kelechi knew that. The unease started as a mild discomfort, almost rational, but it turned into insomnia, stomach pain, a need to investigate. Obiora began reviewing old messages, GPS routes, scheduled emails. He noticed the absence of a call Chuka made every Friday to his personal accountant. That week, it simply didn't happen. He also realized that the entrepreneur's phone chip was removed before the news was official, and the supposed fall occurred at an unusual time for the couple's outings. One sleepless night, Obiora returned to the company's headquarters and accessed the internal cameras. He discovered that Ikenna had been in the boss's office for nearly an hour the day before the outing, without authorization, without a scheduled meeting, and that same night, the yacht's security had been transferred to an unknown third-party team. Too many coincidences. Even with all these disjointed pieces, something concrete was missing. The doubt grew like a silent flame, and while the city believed Chuka was now a fallen hero, an eternal missing person, a name with lit candles and farewell phrases, the loyal employee was the only one asking, what if he's still alive? Confronting Kelechi or Ikenna was too risky. A misstep could cost his job, or worse. But Obiora chose another path: find evidence, or at least traces, and without realizing it, in that solitary impulse of loyalty, he began an investigation that could change everything. Meanwhile, the courts moved swiftly to transfer Chuka's fortune and assets to the surviving wife. The same wife who had visited the records department 3 times to expedite the recognition of his definitive absence. The same department that, days later, would receive an anonymous handwritten tip, because sometimes the truth begins with a simple, something's not right. What would you do if you knew your boss was the victim of a setup, but no one believed you? Answer honestly. I would report it, or I'd be afraid. Adana had learned to observe in silence. Since that man appeared injured at her door with the false name Uzo, something in his behavior stood out from what you'd expect of a mere castaway or aimless survivor. Even in simple clothes, his gestures carried a restrained elegance, as if molded by gala dinners, not sea storms. His words betrayed him too. He spoke with rare precision, used legal terms without noticing, and knew more about cocoa exports and trade routes between Lagos and Accra than many veteran merchants in the village. One morning, while washing sheets, Adana found a heavy object wrapped in a clean shirt at the bottom of a drawer. It was a platinum Swiss watch with personalized details. Beside it, a small titanium nameplate with the inscription, Chuka Obi, the name everyone knew. The man presumed dead. Her breath caught for a second, her heart raced, and the pieces began to fall into place with cruel clarity. Without warning, she walked into the room and held it out in her palm. This name, is it yours? Silence. A long silence. And then, for the first time, the strong man broke. Not like someone trying to convince, but like someone who could no longer bear to lie. He told everything. The staged accident, Kelechi's betrayal, the push on the yacht, the fall, the rescue by unknown fishermen, and the fear of returning. As a broken, rejected man, even by his own story, the words came haltingly, laced with discreet tears, his once impassive face now showing cracks of old pain. Adana said nothing. She just listened, with calm eyes and a steady presence. And when he finished, she replied only, "You may have lost a lot, but you still have the chance to go back and decide what to keep." Those words seared into his soul like hot iron. For days, their silence was filled with knowing glances, short walks, simple meals. But something had changed. For the first time since the attack, a spark of will reappeared. Not the old anger, nor a thirst for revenge. It was something more mature, a choice to rebuild with clarity and strategy. Not just to survive, but to redefine. He decided then that he would return, but not as the man he had been. He would take Adana with him, not as a companion, but as an ally. He knew the time for hiding was over. It was time to piece things together, to prove, to expose. With the help of the only employee he still trusted, Obiora, they began recovering files, messages, and evidence that the tragedy was anything but accidental. The attack had been meticulously planned. Obiora, who had already raised suspicions based on altered routines and unusual movements, dove deeper. He located old backups of the yacht's security system, files supposedly deleted by Ikenna. Among the recovered videos, one sent chills, a silent recording clearly showing Kelechi handing a folder to an unknown security guard 2 days before the fatal outing. Inside the folder, records showed the yacht's layout and exact patrol schedules. At the same time, encrypted messages between Ikenna and an international supplier indicated financial movements siphoning funds from the company for months. Even more shocking was the discovery that Chuka's emotional stability certificate, used to justify the accidental fall, had been forged by a bribed doctor, the same one who'd signed reports in other, hushed-up elite scandals in Lagos. Each piece formed a puzzle that left no doubt. Everything had been premeditated. In a symbolic moment, Chuka watched himself being pushed, frame by frame, by the man he'd trusted his entire life. Beside him, Adana held his hand in silence. No words could console that kind of pain, but there was something greater than the wound, the possibility of justice. Not the loud vengeance everyone would expect, but a calculated, irreversible unmasking. The plan now was different. Instead of returning with fanfare, Chuka decided to reappear at the right moment, with irrefutable evidence, a solid narrative, and the shock of someone rising from the dead with dignity. And this time, he wouldn't return alone, because sometimes all someone needs to find their way again is to be heard by someone who doesn't try to fix, just believes. Justice isn't vengeance. It's putting the truth back where it belongs. If you believe in that too, write Justice for Chuka. The white marble hall of Obi Global's administrative headquarters seemed to float in celebration. It was the final minutes of the annual assembly, an event surrounded by journalists, shareholders, industry influencers, and international bank representatives. The lights were trained on the elevated stage, where the LED panel displayed Ikena's name as the new official CEO of the group. The audience awaited only the traditional champagne toast and the signature that would solidify the new leadership. It was the perfect conclusion for those who believed they had won. Ikena smiled with his chin raised, surrounded by controlled applause. He wore a pearl grey suit with gem-studded cufflinks. Beside him, Kelechi, stunning, made up, confident. The duo radiated the kind of power that seems unshakable, until the heavy wooden doors at the back of the hall opened. The sound was subtle, but the energy in the room shifted like a cold wind cutting through a warm space. Guests began turning, one by one, as if something invisible called them to look. In the center of the aisle, two figures appeared. First, her, Adana, in a deep blue dress, hair in a simple bun, posture firm, and gaze serene. Beside her, pushing his own wheelchair, was him, Chuka Obi. The silence was almost sacred, a silence no one dared break. His face pale, hands on the wheelchair's rims, a tailored dark suit, a fresh haircut. There was no doubt. It was him, the man presumed dead, the original heir, the name that had graced magazine covers, the one who fell from the yacht and shouldn't be there. Adana simply pushed him to the center of the room and then stopped. Chuka, with hands steady on his knees, raised his eyes to the stage, the gaze of a man who had seen the bottom of the sea and chose to return. The confusion started with a murmur. Then journalists stood in unison, cameras in hand. Ikena took 2 steps back, eyes wide. Kelechi froze completely. It was like seeing a ghost. But this ghost brought evidence. Chuka didn't shout. He didn't give a speech. He just looked at the screen and, with a remote in hand, projected the first video, a recovered file from the yacht's internal system. The silent footage showed Kelechi handing a folder to an unknown man 2 days before the accident. The next screen displayed the yacht's layout with red markings. Then came messages, bank statements, recordings, documents, everything. A sergeant from the Financial Crimes Unit, discreetly positioned at the event, took the first step after the presentation ended. 2 officers approached Ikena, who was already sweating profusely and tugging at his shirt collar. The warning was direct. You are under arrest for attempted murder, corporate fraud, and embezzlement. The sound of the handcuffs was sharp. Ikena didn't even try to flee. He only tried to maintain some dignity. He failed. Kelechi, on the other hand, tried to run. She dropped her purse and shoved the security guard by the emergency exit, but she didn't make it to the hallway. 2 officers intercepted her before she could reach the elevator. Her desperate screams echoed through the hall, mixed with disjointed phrases. "This isn't fair. He was weak. I saved the company." The visual chaos contrasted with Chuka's serene expression. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He just closed his eyes for a moment, as if returning his soul to his body after a long time away. Adana held his hand. She didn't need to say anything. The board was speechless. The shareholders in shock. The journalist didn't know what to cover first, but amid that whirlwind, there was a man in a wheelchair with a gaze that didn't beg for respect. It commanded it. Because that day he didn't return as an heir. He returned as a survivor. Good winds now blew from the sea, no longer bringing fear but relief. The same vastness that once nearly took Chuka's life now offered peace in gentle waves. Between the salt stinging his eyes and the constant sound of water hitting the rocks, there was gratitude. Because it was in that sea that he lost everything, but it was also there that he found the woman who gave him everything back, twofold. After the official separation from Kelechi was finalized in court, no disputes, no public appearances, just a necessary end, Chuka and Adana held their vows on the beach. No printed invitations, no lavish buffet, no celebrity magazines, just shells scattered on the sand, sisal ropes as decoration, the smell of fresh fish from docked boats, and the sound of the sea as a silent witness. The setting was rustic, but the atmosphere was sacred. Because they weren't just celebrating a marriage, they were celebrating a rebirth. Even with his name cleared, his inherited fortune and million-dollar contracts re-established, Chuka refused to return to Abuja's mirrored skyscrapers. He chose to build a wooden house by the beach, where he could feel the sea breeze through the windows and hear seagulls at dawn. What many would see as a step back, for him was redemption. True wealth now lay in the peace that filled his chest every morning. when he opened his eyes and saw Adana there, hair tousled by the wind, cutting onions for the day's fish, or laughing with the village neighbors. The trauma's echoes lingered. Sometimes nightmares came like whirlpools in the early hours, and the sound of strong waves made him relive the fall into the sea, the darkness, the despair. But there were hands to hold, eyes to look into, a voice to calm him. And little by little, Chuka began building new memories over the old ones. Memories of embraces, simple meals by the water, children running around his chair. From time to time, Adana still fished, not out of necessity but for pleasure. It was a way to honor her childhood, her parents, the life before the chaos. And sometimes, even with his still weak arms, Chuka joined her in the boat. He stayed silent, watching the horizon, letting the breeze hit his face. Each time he did, he felt stronger, not because he had defeated Ikenna, but because he was alive, whole, loved. In that simple life of bare feet and lamplit dinners, he discovered something the Obi Empire had never given him: freedom. The wheelchair no longer confined him. His fears no longer defined him. He was beside a woman who loved him when no one else saw him, who held his hand when he no longer believed there was ground beneath him. In the end, that's what mattered. Having someone who doesn't run when the waves rise, someone who chooses to stay even when the world turns to wreckage. Chuka no longer wanted to be remembered as the millionaire heir. He wanted to be remembered as the man who returned from the bottom of the sea, and instead of fleeing it, chose to live by its shore, beside the woman who saved him. Some stories aren't about triumphing with shouts, but about being reborn in the silence of those given up as lost. Chuka didn't return for revenge. He returned to live. Because when the truth survives the shipwreck, even the sea learns to give back. And when a love is born in pain and blooms in truth, not even a wheelchair can stop it from walking. Adana didn't just save a man, she saved an entire story. And now, together, they build a future where no scar needs to be hidden. New stories await on the edge of the next tide. Click the video below and dive into the next emotion. See you soon.